Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, martial arts fans all over the world. My name is Robert Huddleston. Today, I ask you, how has MMA changed the world? Don't know? I'll tell you. It's the least that I can do. Before 1993, before the UFC broke into, and dare I say the mainstream, but public awareness, mixed martial arts, I wouldn't even call it mixed martial arts then, it was just brutal cage fighting, uh, style against style. Up until that, you had long secret lineages, whether it be boxing or wrestling or any traditional martial arts where they wear the white gi. These weren't things you could just walk into and get told, hey, here's how you become a tough guy. Here's how you learn martial arts. Here's how you see the end result. Often because those people didn't know. A karate guy couldn't really teach you how to go out in the street and beat the brakes off people who knew how to fight. They could teach you how to kick people that didn't know how to block a kick. You would train to fight hard against other karatekas, but out in the street, you're not anticipating getting into a karate fight. You're going to kick or punch a guy that doesn't presumably know the same techniques that you would. And I say karate, I never even saw karate school growing up. It was taekwondo schools everywhere. Which, nothing against taekwondo. I think it's probably the least competent of the martial arts. That being said, all these martial arts break down into their sections. It's like the mafia. Well, the Irish mob has a way of bootlegging alcohol, and the Italian mob has a way of bootlegging alcohol. And it's probably really, really close. But there's some dogmatic differences that might make one less or more effective than the other. None of them are as effective as like being Anheuser-Busch, right? And having the full rounded cooperation of the police and the economy and, the best scientists you can get out of school. No, you're working from a limited pool of options and information. And you're wearing blinders. You're not going outside. Could you just go and train at a taekwondo school? Sure, but it was you had to pay a lot of money. And then there was a long process, and they had a codified process of, they do have, I say had, like taekwondo went somewhere, but in the past, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was a codified process of becoming a master, but it was long and it was drawn out and it was narrow. You couldn't just go and win fights. Even if you were a gift. Like maybe you could, but your sensei would decide whether you were ready for a belt or not. That still occurs, and there's still curriculums. But when MMA happened, entry level became, well, if someone can be booked a fight, you can go book a fight with very little martial training or experience from somebody who was experienced. Problem is, you didn't know whether your taekwondo teacher was a tough guy or not. In Taylorville, where I'm from, there was a tough guy. His name is Tom Perry. He's a sheriff now. Ran a slew of martial arts schools, trained the Olympics team. Heard a couple stories about him beating some people up. They say he could fight. No one he ever trained went on to become a mixed martial arts champion. Maybe one guy became a local big deal. But like right now, there's no UFC champions that are like, oh, I credit Taekwondo. Plenty of them studied Taekwondo. Pull a kick or two from Taekwondo. But no one's ever like, oh, I was Grandmaster so-and-so's lineage and I win fights with Taekwondo. It virtually doesn't happen, right? There's a few guys that claim karate. But then they have to, seriously adopt karate for MMA. It's not just a thing that happened. They didn't just come in and do karate on people. Like Lauda Machida, was the karate guy in MMA for the longest time. Well, he also knows sumo and judo. Is a Brazilian. He's a black belt in. They have a belt system in sumo, I guess. He's a black belt in sumo. He's a black belt in judo. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and his dad is a grand master in karate. One of his good friends he trained with for years, Diet Nog, was almost a representative for South America in boxing. So, like, his good friends are high level boxers, the best jiu-jitsuis in the world. His dad is a grandmaster and head of like the Brazilian Karate Association. So, sure, he's balls deep in karate, but he did 10 other things to make himself a competent mixed martial artist. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson trains karate heavy, still practices jiu-jitsu, still practices boxing, still has to learn, even though he never shoots, still has to learn the double leg takedown defense. He's not, snap kicking people when they shoot in on him. But before 93, we didn't know any of that. We learned real quick that no karate guys, no taekwondo guys came in and won. Gerard Gordeau was actually a tough guy. He was 6'5", 220. He looked real skinny. I think somebody called him a 150-pound guy. No, he was 220. And he was a black belt, I believe, in Kyokushin karate. And Savate, which is a blend of karate and kickboxing from France. And dude could fight. He was bad. Hoist beat him ultimately. But then, name another karate guy in the second or the third or the fifth or the 10th. Name another karate guy till Machida. Right? I mean, Chuck was in karate. I guess you could say that, but that was back when people still claimed where they came from. So, it was another decade before you had Chuck Liddell come in and he was a karate guy. George St. Pierre wore a gi, he was a karate guy. In all fairness, George St. Pierre would tell you it was his karate that gave him timing. But he also trained with world-class wrestlers constantly, world-class boxers constantly. He's not just doing kata to win championships. So that brings me to movies. Before MMA, before 93, and still, there was both. It was take and give. Movies would portray martial arts, and as much as we all love martial arts movies and are martial arts fans today because of the movies, damn, if movies just didn't do so much damage to the idea of martial arts. Like, if you didn't train with Senzo Tanaka and learn to do it blindfolded, you could never beat Chong Li. Right? If you didn't have the glow and your hands didn't light up, you were never going to beat Sho'nuff. Right? Well, your hands ain't got a glow. You didn't have to train at the temple. You didn't have to be adopted by a ninja. Chris Weidman, all-American wrestler from upstate New York, had the hands to knock out Anderson Silva. I mean, there was nothing mystical or magical or transcendental. He had to go to the mountain. He prayed. He's a Christian. But it didn't require hours of meditation. He wasn't snatching goldfish out of the water. He wasn't snatching birds out of the air. He wasn't balancing on posts with incense needles burning around him. He was just a guy who trained hard, who drilled hard, who used his strength and his reach and his endurance and applied them to martial techniques. There was no magic involved. But growing up, if you would have thought, based on movies, you can't just go learn to throw punches and kicks. You can't just wrestle and have conditioned lungs and a muscular back. Like, that's not enough. And that was a disservice. It was always the fighting ability had to transcend and you had to throw a Hadouken. There are no Hadoukens. There's never been a Hadouken. Even the invisible Hadoukens, when they do it, we say, phew. Doesn't work like that. Now there's, what do they call it, the death punch, the Dimac? Yeah, Chuck Liddell throws it. And it looked like he barely landed. Just blink. And he blew your brains all over the wall. Just a touch. Bas Rutten said Benji Radek. Bas Rutten's a Pride champ. King of Pancakes. King of Pancrase. UFC champion. Kickboxer from Holland. Kickboxing champion. The guy's the real deal. says no one ever hit harder than Benji Raddick, who's like 6 foot and 185 pounder. Said lying on his back, he'll knock you out punching up. Running backwards, he'll throw the crookedest, creepiest, sissiest punch. If it touches you, you're going to sleep. And I was shocked. I'm like, well, how'd that guy not become a world champion with the DIMAC? Well, you need more than the DIMAC. Sometimes you can't train it. Sometimes you're just an idiot with great shoulders and great butt, and they're connected really well across your back. You know, it's your left butt cheek has to be really connected to your right shoulder to just and blow somebody's head off. Well, Chuck did it. Well, Chuck's back was the size of a table. I do this, you can't see. Mike Tyson fought this weekend. Mike Tyson, for all his strength and power and smashing, but didn't put Roy out. I predicted Roy would win. Hit Roy with stuff. So, the hardest punchers in the world don't DIMAC, and the people who've never trained for a DIMAC a day in their life just have that deft touch and put your lights out. Movies made you think that only training to punch a row of candles out. Would you ever become a real martial artist? Would you ever transcend? 1993 changed all that. A skinny dude in a gi choked a bunch of dudes. In fact, took a boxer down. His name was... Damn, what was that dude? I've said his name a million times. Art Jimerson. Dude came out with one glove on. Thought he would palm with this one and box with this one. Or vice versa, I forget. Hoist took him down, crawled on top of him, moved him around a little bit. Because he had no idea what was about to happen. Like, he thought Hoist would spring tentacles and wrap him up. Just getting moved around, he tapped. He's like, this guy's going to break my arms, break my legs, and break my neck, break my... he would have... you said it. He really didn't train. I mean, I'm sure Hoist Gracie could twist your leg, but that's kind of frowned upon in old school jiu-jitsu, if you didn't know. He was going to twist your arm or choke you. We all... Mystery's up, but for the longest time, there was a mystery that went with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because nobody knew what you were going to do, and we had been taught to believe that all martial arts came with a mystery. Right? Like, you look at Steven Seagal, grab people's wrist and throw them all over the place, and it looks magic. Well, people Steven Seagal's doing that is cooperating with him, and Steven Seagal's a giant. He's 6'5", he's 220, when he was skinny, he was 220 pounds. So, can he grab my arm and throw me across the room? Yeah, I know guys his size who've never trained a day in their life that can do that. Can you train for your hands to be fast? Sure. Does Seagal know how to fight? Yeah. But Seagal will tell you a bunch of other guys who... Van Damme, for instance, has a karate kickboxing record in Europe under the name Von Varenberg of 20-1. To my knowledge, Seagal has never competed. I've never seen competition footage. He'll tell you that Van Damme can't fight, it's not a fighter. Michael Jai White will do the same thing. Wildly impressive videos of Michael Jai performing amazing kicks, amazing punches. Brian Callen has a story about him kicking a punching bag off the chain. Sure. You never did it against anybody. And they'll all point fingers and say, well, you can't fight, and you can't fight, and you can't fight. They were all prime young men in 1993. Michael Jai White didn't enter a tournament and kick anybody in the face. Steven Seagal didn't throw anybody across the octagon. They all had the opportunity, right? Michael Jai White says, and they ask him, why didn't you fight? He's like, oh, all fighters are broke. Hoist Gracie isn't broke. He still works. Michael Jai White still works. Chuck Liddell isn't broke. Or a bunch of... Most fighters, most actors are broke. So we have to go back to the myth of Hollywood. You would see everybody would have their own style, whether it was Jeff Speakman with Kempo, whether it was Steven Seagal with Aikido, whether it was... Chuck Norris, he was just karate kickboxing. Bruce Lee was Kung Fu and Wing Chun, and then Jeet Kune Do. And all these things had a mystery about them. And then you had the flood of white samurai movies about white guys who went and lived in Japan and trained with the ninja and sat crisscross applesauce in the pagoda with their eyes closed. And None of those guys ever showed up to the octagon and won a fist fight. Not one of them. Not ever. Not one Chi Master. Not one ninja. Gary Goodridge, I think, was a black belt in Kuksul Won, which is, I think, a Korean version of karate. Fought all over. I'm sure he has a wall full of belts, but he was never like UFC champion. I don't think he was ever Pride champion. He was famous in the 90s and in the 2000s, back when guys still fought and had gis on. Matter of fact, Mark Schultz from the movie Foxcatcher. In the movie Foxcatcher, Mark Schultz fought some Russian. And in real life, he fought Big Daddy Gary Goodridge. Joe Rogan says, he's like, I don't know why that happened. Why did we do it? I know exactly why they did that. Somebody who didn't know anything about martial arts didn't like the optics of a bald, white American wrestler beating up a black Canadian in a gi in a boxing ring. Or, I'm sorry, in a cage. I forget, it wasn't Pride, it was in the UFC. Thought the optics was bad, and thought it just didn't make sense. A black Canadian in a karate gi. So, they changed the movie and make him a Russian. The movie then loses all credibility. But Gary Goodridge actually fought Mark Schultz. Got creamed. Mark Schultz was just better than him, just able to take him down. He wasn't, all the side kicks and spinning back, all the karate, all the Kuksu Wan in the world was no match for nobody. I mean, Mark Schultz could do nothing else. He just wrestled him and won, decidedly. So up until 93, you had schools that put out guys who maybe could or couldn't fight. I mean, there was karate guys who could fight. But I know a ton of black belts in Taekwondo that can't fight. And none of those guys ever came and won the UFC. Quickly, it came down to wrestlers and jiu-jitsu guys. I know there were a handful of strikers in there, but there's never been a guy come over from boxing and kickboxing and just dominate. Israel Adesanya is the closest. He was a kickboxer. Alistair Overeem never won a belt. Name another guy from kickboxing or Muay Thai. And in fact, Gina Carano came from Muay Thai, had 10 fights, nobody's, one fight against Cyborg, got creamed, and then was able to parlay that into a career of just poking her head back in the sport every couple of years, saying, hey, I might fight. Never fighting. Kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Like, what if Chuck would have, after the first Randy fight, been like, I was on this great run and I got clobbered. I'm just going to do some movies and poke my head back in and talk about fighting again, maybe. That's the downside of MMA. Though there was no long lineage, though anybody could do it. And while the iron was hot and the pool was shallow, a lot of people went for a swim that just wouldn't cut it, shouldn't cut it. Megan Anderson just recently, today I think it was on Twitter, said about Nate Robinson getting beat up this past weekend, that if you've never stepped in the ringer cage, you shouldn't criticize somebody who does, or shouldn't poke fun. And it's like, well, nonsense. We criticize field goal kickers and politicians and actors all the time. There's nothing sacred or holy about stepping into the cage. And that's another attribute that happened. We all had this respect of a belt on a gi. There's no respect for a cage because anyone can do it. If you're George St. Pierre, you walk in and bow every time, people tend to respect you. And when something bad happens, maybe people aren't terrible haters. But the notion of cage fighting, if you're just a tattooed up animal going in there to bust heads, or somebody who thinks they can do it from another sport, whether it be boxing or MMA, boxing now I think has a way lower entry level because of MMA, specifically like Nate and the Paul brothers, KSI. You have a whole different, I don't need 10 years of lineage. I think it was Chemo that ruined that. Chemo came out to fight Royce Gracie in one of the UFCs, 4, I believe. 3, 4. And you had to be a master. Well, he was a Hawaiian who fist fought, took 6 weeks of Taekwondo when he was a kid, and was maybe a pro football player, a Canadian league, but a big, tough guy. Some black belt in the back goes, hey, I'm a black belt in Taekwondo. You're a black belt. Get out there. But he just ran out there and threw Royce. No technique. ran across the ring and did that, and they got into it, and it was the ugliest, sloppiest fight, but Hoist just had to wear a 250-pound guy who had enough endurance to keep scrambling with him. Proves that you not only didn't need to train years and years and years in the arts, you needed next to no training. I mean, you can't do that in boxing. They would never let a guy with no training. Okay, so Floyd Mayweather boxed Conor, who had no boxing, and went 30 minutes with him. Everybody likes to say that Floyd carried him. Well, no, if Floyd could have went out and threw a 1-2 and put Conor down, he would have done it. The money was already made. Floyd don't care if you like him. Floyd had to fight Conor for 30 minutes. Just a bigger athlete. Well, Chemo was a bigger athlete than Hoist and was able to nearly pull off a miracle, right? So what does that bring us to? Anybody can just go into an MMA gym and pick up lineage if you're willing to do the hard work. I guess you could have done that in boxing gyms or taekwondo gyms in the past, but boy, it always seemed like an expensive racket where, again, never saw a boxing gym. And almost every gi gym I saw, they can beat up people who can't fight, but they weren't ever actually out doing any tough guy thing. In fact, they were declaring they could never fight anybody because their hands were deadly weapons. And then every now and then, one of those guys would get chinned out at a bar and go right to sleep. You couldn't get your hands up, couldn't take a punch, so in the years of Tang Soo Do didn't do you any good. All the years wearing a gi and bowing to a master, and then you meet the master, and the master's fat. Well, okay, well, then cage fighting happened. Well, you guys, well, we don't do that cage fighting stuff. I don't know, George St. Pierre wears a gi, he's cage fighting. So how did MMA change the world? Boxing had to get interesting, because boxing got lame. For many years, Vladimir Klitschko was able to just coast to wins and outbox dudes. Well, people stopped watching, and they'd rather watch Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner with way less technique. Just, I'm going to fight the devil out of you. We'd rather watch that on Spike than tune in to watch Vladimir Klitschko beat up some other guy we've never heard of in routine clinical fashion. You have a decade of that, of Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather was only interesting in the past couple of years. From 1995 to 2000, I don't know, 15, was anybody watching Floyd just do this over and over and over? I didn't. I tried to watch every fight I could. I'm like, okay, so Floyd's going to go out there and not get hit. It became very boring. To be interesting, Floyd had to fight somebody who, with rough abandon, was going to fight him. Movies? I still see movies where guys don't, like, you throw spinning kicks. And it's like, well, that'll kill a guy if you land that. Or you'll see the exact opposite. Somebody will say, pow, 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 pow. And they stand up and their face is fine. When you watch a real fight, and again, they're doing it every weekend now, pow, 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 break somebody's face to pieces. Well, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, I can't watch a Donnie Yen movie anymore because I know you're not going to 1,000 Wing Chun punch somebody. I can't watch a movie where it tries to choreograph MMA because it's always too slick. You're not going to block every knee, and then suddenly we're up here, and then we're blocking again, and then we're under and over, and we go to the ground. It's always a jump and a pull with your arm like down into an arm. That never works. Works in pro wrestling. Worked with my buddies when I did it as a kid on the trampoline. One guy's ever thrown a flying armbar. His name was Demetrius Johnson, and he suplexed the guy. You couldn't have put it in a movie. If you tried to make that up, you would not only choreograph it poorly, but nobody would believe it. In fact, it happened, and most of you were not even aware of it. Suplexed the guy and caught him on the way down in a submission. Otherwise, that shit never happens. But in movies, it happens all the time. Everyone's got the slickest move, and their opponent always has the slickest defense. Moves are sloppy. Defenses are sloppy. You'll throw a beautiful 1, 2, 3, and they'll miss. And your headbutt will be the thing that dazes the guy. And you didn't mean to throw a headbutt, you just slipped. And that's how fights are won all the time. Or you're boxing the daylights out of a guy, and he just throws a Hail Mary knee and plants it upside your head, and you lose the fight. That's how it goes. Movies can't pull that off yet. Will they ever? I don't know. But I now know actors have way less credibility. I can't go back and watch Southpaw. I never got to watch it. It's like, who cares about a boxer that isn't real? What can you show me now in a boxing movie that Rocky didn't show me already? And I'm not being funny. I like Jake Gyllenhaal. He's a great actor. I about can't watch fights in a movie. I can't see people throw back fists. It's hard to watch actors I know that are 5'7" beat up actors I know that are 6'1" and 220. It's like, that's a camera trick, Bane. You're not 6'5". In fact, I'm sure you can't fight. So that's why when you throw punches, they look silly. Channing Tatum, he can fight pretty good. That fighting movie wasn't bad. He can act. But for the most part, stuff that works on film, I've seen too many real fights now that when I watch it, I'm like, well, that's not how that kick would land. That's not how that punch is thrown. You would simply never take that person down in the bar. So I have a real hard time watching movies and fight scenes. I have a real hard time driving by places that still teach Taekwondo and a gi, and I'm like, is that kid going to make a career in Taekwondo? Is that kid going to be able to competently defend themselves? Probably neither. You know, like soccer. You're basically doing soccer. But you're never going to make a living off it, and it's not going to save your life unless you run. It will simply make you more athletic. It's not like you're learning combat skills. Because most people who know Taekwondo aren't going to... Have you ever seen somebody kick somebody in the street? Head kick, body kick? It probably happens now more than ever. But when have you ever seen somebody land a kick in a fight out in the street? Never. Never, not once ever. Never. Didn't happen. Because that shit doesn't work. Now, it works if you're George St. Pierre and you know a bunch of other shit, but if you're just out in the street trying to Taekwondo people, sorry. So I'm shocked that those places are still open. Now that we know you can't go do that to somebody who knows how to fight, or they'd be doing it in MMA. I've never seen a boxing gym. So, I mean, I know boxing exists as a competitive entity, but I don't know anybody who boxes or knows how to box. I've never seen anybody win an MMA fight as a Taekwondo. And all the actors that we ever thought knew how to fight, most of them had the opportunity and was gonna fight or knew, but none of them ever did it. Steve Seagal didn't Aikido nobody. Michael Jai White didn't sidekick anybody. Randy Couture came in and wrestled in Dirty Box. Chuck Liddell actually came in and punched and kicked. But he also wrestled, right? So, how does MMA keep changing the world? Well, you now have people entry-level fighting in boxing like you never would have. There are probably more dangerous martial artists on the street than ever were, even despite the boom of all the McDojos that ever lived. And I think, I know there are still places, we have some police issues this past year on what works and what doesn't when detaining a human being. And the Gracies are like, we have courses. Why doesn't everybody know this? Like, there's no mystery about what works in a fight or what doesn't anymore. But somehow there's police stations. There's movie producers. There are people that get loans. I mean, I don't know if anybody's opening a Taekwondo. There's places that are still paying their bills teaching Taekwondo when you can now look, and we have 1993. So the UFC since 93 is, 27 years? You now got 27 years of under the microscope. What works in a fight and what doesn't. So how did MMA change the world? Not enough. Really. Like, there should be MMA programs in schools. There should be MMA programs at all military and police universities and academies. There should be people who know how punches and kicks and throws go on the sets of movie and television. And not like, oh, it's a decree from me. Like, there's no reason to not, because there are people out there who know how to fight now. And somewhere between Taekwondo place up the street and a Jewish guy, hiring an American Marine who claims he knows a Chinaman to make a ninja movie. True story. Should never happen. We should be in the golden age of fight cinema. And in fact, I'm shocked at the good fights that don't exist on television, on film. I'm shocked at the amount of bad training that still goes on out there. I mean, dare I want to praise a communist country, but it seems like in Dagestan, where Khabib is from, there's just gyms where kids can go train and learn competent sport technique. As opposed to, maybe here's some feel-good mysticism mixed in with some athleticism. I don't know, I insulted a lot of people and a lot of arts. Tell me what you think. I think MMA has changed the world, but not enough. We're a third of the way there, maybe. Like and subscribe, share this video. Fight with me down in the comments. God bless you.